Our topic is about husbands and wives together at the cross. Our memory text comes from Ephesians chapter 5 verse 25 to 27. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. Deliberately, Paul intertwines advice for marriage in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 21 to 33 with similes of the conjugal relationship between Christ and his church. The advice of Paul to the church can be summarized as follows. Submit to one another, to become one flesh with Christ. His advice for a successful marriage. Husbands, love your wives as yourselves, and wives, respect your husbands. We have 4 points to study. First is advice for wives, Ephesians chapter 5 verse 22 to 24. Wives, submit to your own husbands, as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Unity is essential for the church. Paul introduces a general advice to achieve this unity. Mutual submission. He then applies this advice to a specific case, in marriage. The woman submits to her husband, not as to a boss, but as to Christ, her Savior and Protector. The Bible offers no basis for the concept that the wife is inferior to her husband and, therefore, must submit to him as a superior. The wife should act with humility and respect toward her husband, not with arrogance and superiority. She should assume an attitude of loving and supportive loyalty, subject to him, as to Christ. Second, Christ and his church, husband and wife. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 25 to 27. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In Paul's analogy, Christ is the husband, or bridegroom, and the church is his wife or bride. The question is, what does Christ do for his wife? Friends, Jesus loved the church as a wife. He loves us. Then he gives himself as the bride's price. The bridegroom had to give goods or money to the bride's father to take her as his wife, showing how much he valued her. Let's read Genesis chapter 34 verse 11. Also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Then, Jesus bathes the bride. Christ takes on the role of the bridesmaids, preparing the bride himself. Next, Jesus speaks the word of promise. Through the promise, Christ commits to caring for and loving the church. Then, Jesus prepares and adorns the bride. Adorned by Christ, the church appears, holy and without blemish. Then he presents the bride. Assuming the role of the Father, Jesus presents the church to himself and marries her. Paul presents the wedding of Jesus and his church in its chronological development. First is engagement. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Jesus paid the bride's price by dying on the cross. In this way, he officially engaged himself for the church. Second, preparation for the wedding ceremony. Verse 26. That he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. Currently, he prepares the church by sanctifying and purifying each member, cleansing every stain of sin, and smoothing every wrinkle of character. Third, the wedding ceremony itself. Verse 27. So that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Fourth, Jesus will come to take his wife, a glorious church, to live happily ever after. Answer these questions in yourself. Am I preparing for the wedding? Do I let Jesus prepare me every day for that beautiful ceremony? Do I long for the moment when I can see my husband face to face? You can post this video for a while and try to reflect on the question. We are now on the third point of our study. Our third point is advice for husbands. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 28 to 30. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ is the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Much harm and sorrow have been caused by a misinterpretation of the words spoken to Eve. Genesis 3 verse 16. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Aware of this, Paul wants husbands to understand how they should act towards their wives. Firstly, to love them, as Christ loved the church, willing to give their lives for them. If they are ever tempted to treat them harshly, they must remember that she is a part of themselves, and by mistreating her, they show that they do not love either her or themselves. Those who exercise improper dominion and harm their wives mistreat their own bodies, their own flesh, and their own bones. Our last point, Christ and his church. One flesh. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 31 to 33. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Paul concludes his advice to spouses with a reference to Genesis chapter 2 verse 2. The question is, what does the expression one flesh mean? The sexual unity in marriage reflects their emotional and spiritual unity. They are no longer two. They no longer act separately. They have left their past to create a future together. They are united. They are one. This is a mystery, a divine gift, which Paul spiritually applies to Christ and his church. The church cannot exist separately from Christ but depends on its union with Jesus. Being one, the husband loves his wife, and vice versa, the wife respects her husband, and vice versa, as Christ loves and respects each one of us. Thank you for listening to the Amazing Creation official channel. Don't forget to share and subscribe. Thanks and God bless.